Book 6. We've talked about the beginning of Book 6 before. Young Nausicaa, Athena has come to Nausicaa in a dream. Line 30, a reference to her marriage. Disguised, the bright-eyed goddess chided, Nausicaa, how could your mother bear a careless girl like you? Look at your fine clothes lying here neglected, with your marriage not far off, the day you should be decked in all your glory and offer elegant dress to those who form your escort. And we've talked about the currency of the fact that in this 3,000-year-old work, we have a young maiden whose clothes are lying all over her bedroom floor. The reference to marriage is interesting because it's going to crop up over and over. You won't stay unwed long, she says in line 37. And so, even though Nausicaa is of marriageable age and she knows that, she's getting ready to meet and help a man, and there are references to her getting married. So I don't necessarily know what to make of the fact that Homer tells this or he sort of sets up this young woman to meet a handsome stranger, but then this handsome stranger is unavailable to her. And so perhaps she's a foiled character for Telemachus, but it's interesting the way that this marriage piece keeps cropping up over and over again. And perhaps it's just so that perhaps it just primes Nausicaa to be willing to help Odysseus. In line 58, again, we see a reference to spinning, as we've seen early in the other books. Her mother sat at the hearth with several waiting women, spinning yarn on a spindle, lustrous sea blue wool. So kind of an echo of Penelope spinning. In line 100, we see a reference to the domestic heroism while we figure out how it is, or we learn how it is that they do laundry. And so the descriptions, as we've talked about before, of household chores become heroic deeds in the absence of wars, battles, and armor that we can chronicle. Line 113, we have a nice epic simile. White-armed Nausicaa led their singing, her maidens, dancing beat, as lithe as Artemis. Now, isn't this interesting? This is the second comparison we've had to Artemis, virgin goddess. Before, it was Helen, which was sort of a bizarre comparison to Artemis. Here, perhaps more appropriate. As lithe as Artemis with her arrows striding down from a high peak, Taygetus, towering ridge, or Erymanthus thrilled to race with the wild boar or bounding deer, and nymphs of the hills race with her, daughters of Zeus, whose shield is storm and thunder, raging the hills in sport. And Leto's heart exalts as head and shoulders over the rest, her daughter rises unmistakable. In line 140, we have another epic simile, and so here we have this really interesting scene. This has been much painted in art. The scene of Odysseus crawling out of the bushes naked to try to get help from Odysseus. He's covered with brine from the sea, his clothes have been ripped from him, he's shaggy, he's bedraggled, and he has to approach this young maiden and figure out how to get help. But then we have this epic simile, which is so unusual. Muttering so, great Odysseus crept out of the bushes, stripping off with his massive hand a leafy branch from the tangled olive growth to shield his body. So he is taking measures of modesty to hide his private parts. And out he stalked, as a mountain lion, exultant in his power, strides through wind and rain, and his eyes blaze, and he charges sheep or oxen or chases wild deer, but his hunger drives him on to go for flocks, even to raid the best defended homestead. So Odysseus moved out, about to mingle with all those lovely girls. So we have this really interesting epic simile where we have a predator coming into a farmstead and plundering the naive and innocent flocks of sheep or oxen or wild deer. And so Odysseus is being compared to this predator, even though we know that as far as the young ladies are concerned, or perhaps we don't know as far as the young ladies are concerned, that he will not mean them any harm. Line 160, he has to decide what to do. And he says, should he fling, this is 155, should he fling his arms around her knees, the young beauty? And what this is a gesture of supplication. The suppliant would get down on his knees and would put his hands on the knees of the person he was asking help from. But this would mean to touch her. And because he looks frightful and because he has no clothes on, and partly because he's been compared to this predator, he wonders, should I be close enough to touch her, plead for help, or stand back, plead with a winning word, beg her to lead him to the town and lend him clothing? This was the better way, he thought. So he decides that this is that it's best not to try to get too close to her, but to try to use flattery. And so what he says in line 163 or 162, he launched in at once, endearing, sly, and suave. Here I am at your mercy, princess. Are you a goddess or a mortal? Which is just a lovely opening line. If one of the gods who rule the skies up there, you're Artemis to the life, the daughter of mighty Zeus. I see her now. Just look at your build, your bearing, your lithe flowing grace. But if you're one of the mortals living here on earth, 3 times blessed are your father, your queenly mother, 3 times over your brothers too. How often their hearts must warm with joy to see you striding into the dances, such a bloom of beauty. So he flatters her, and then ideally he's going to be helped. She will help give him what he needs. Line 200, he references what he's missing. No finer, greater gift in the world than that when man and woman possess their home, 2 minds, 2 hearts that work as one. This very clearly is a reference to his relationship with Penelope and how perfect they are for one another. But remember, Nausicaa has marriage in the back of her mind, and here is Odysseus making a reference to it, perhaps as something he's longing for, but it has to come across differently to Nausicaa. In line 228, we see a reference to, Nausicaa talks to her young women, but we see a reference to the guest-host relationship. Here's an unlucky wanderer straight our way, and we must tend him well. Every stranger and beggar comes from Zeus, she says, which we all know as the patron of travelers. Zeus is the one who would take exception to anyone turning away a guest. In line 253, we see one of our formulaic passages. This passage is going to show up over and over again in this epic. Perhaps the idea of formulaic lines and phrases and passages was to sort of give the storyteller or the bard a place to recite things while he was planning in his head what needed to come next. 253, Zeus's daughter Athena made him taller to all eyes, his build more massive now, and down from his brow she ran his curls like thick hyacinth clusters full of blooms. As a master craftsman washes gold over beaten silver, a man the god of fire and Queen Athena trained in every fine technique and finishes off this latest effort, handsome work. So she lavished splendor over his head and shoulders now. So Odysseus is now clean and shiny. He's more buff than he was before. He's very handsome. He's very appealing. And we have this lovely epic simile tucked into the end of that passage. And again, the passage will show up identically several more times in the epic. Line 270, we see that Nausicaa is impressed. At first he seemed appalling, I must say. Now he seems like a god who rules the skies up there. Ah, if only a man like that were called my husband. Lived right here, pleased to stay forever. So perhaps she's got some wishful thinking, because of course that marriage idea has been planted in her mind. Line 300, we see that she is a clever young lady, because Odysseus, she's going to take him to her father's palace, but if she walks into town with a handsome stranger, then there's going to be talk. She says, some old salt might mock us behind our back, line 300. We have our share of insolent types in town, and one of the coarser sorts, spying us, might say, now who's that tall, handsome stranger Nausicaa has in tow? Where'd she light on him, her husband-to-be? Just wait. But who? Some shipwrecked stray she's taken up with? Some alien from abroad? Since nobody lives nearby? Unless it's really a god come down from the blue to answer her prayers and to have her all his days. So she's aware that there's gossip, that there's talk, and that she has a reputation to preserve. And so what she says is that the best thing for him to do, line 323, take a seat there, wait a while, and give us time to make it into town and reach my father's house. Then when you think we're home, walk on yourself to the city. Ask the way to my father's palace, generous King Alcinous. You cannot miss it. Even an innocent child could guide you there. And so she says, just wait out here outside the city until we've had a chance to get home. And so I will not be seen with you, and my reputation will not suffer. And Odysseus thinks that this is a grand idea. Athena thinks that this is a grand idea, and it shows that Nausicaa is a very, very bright and savvy young woman. And so he waits and then goes into the city.